Today being ANZAC Day, I thought I'd talk about the history of war commemoration in Australia, in Queensland, and more particularly in our own part of the world. I'll discuss and show you the various types of local war memorials, plaques and honour boards, who commissioned them and where they can be found. I'll talk a bit about what these memorials tell us about those who created them and those who are listed on them. I'll also delve briefly into a few stories of individuals listed on our memorials, and I'll conclude with a couple of observations about what I think ANZAC Day and wartime commemorations mean in 2026. So there you go, contents. But first, a bit of history. Most of you know this stuff. Of course, World War I was the first war in which we fought as a nation. From a population of less than 5 million people, 300,000 enlisted. I read just today a stat that said that 1 in 2 families were affected in some way by death or injury during World War I. 60,000 died, a sixth of those were from Queensland. ANZAC, of course, stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. I believe the name, they came up with the name when they were getting the troops ready in Egypt before the landing at Gallipoli. I think it was a Plaques idea and they went with it. 16,000 ANZAC troops landed at Gallipoli on that first day, April 25th, 111 years ago today. Over 8,000 Australians died at Gallipoli, about 18,000 were wounded before they withdrew in December 1915. So that was the birth of the ANZAC legend. Now, of course, it's important to remember that, and you may not know this fact, and I'd forgotten it, there's only one Australian who died during World War II that was returned for Australia for burial. It was Major General William Bridges. And I can only assume when they brought him back because he was the most senior officer that died during the war. So he was the only one. And of course, what did this mean? It meant that every other soldier who died overseas during the war were buried near where they fell, or they were buried in cemeteries. And of course, so many of them have no known grave. And after the war, a lot of us, relatives of these people, even if there was a memorial to go and visit, a shrine or one of those big war cemeteries throughout Europe or at Gallipoli, well, most people couldn't afford to go overseas and pay their respects. They needed something tangible. They needed another way to grieve the loss of their loved ones and remember the fallen. The first ANZAC Day commemorations were actually held the very next year. They were held in Europe. And the very first Australian dawn service was held in 1923. Reverend Arthur White, he'd been a minister with the AIF. He'd been one of the first to go to Gallipoli. He'd served as a padre during the war. Ironically, after the war, he was posted to Albany, the very port where so many of those troops had been sent from. And he oversaw the planning and the execution of the first dawn service in Australia, the first official one in Albany in 1923. And what was happening around Australia, including Queensland, was that communities were starting to work out what they were going to do to commemorate those from their own districts that had gone to serve. And of course, legislation started to be introduced around the states to recognise ANZAC Day as a sacred day. So we have impacts on trading hours and sporting fixtures, even two-up, for example. There's rules about who can play, who can authorise the games. I was talking with Grace about this before the meeting. I believe what I read is sub-branches can give permission to licensed venues to hold two-up games today. But importantly, they can't charge admission and no one takes a commission. The money that's bet is the money that's won. So no one else makes a cut. And I think that was the way that two-up used to be run. So remembrance in Queensland. We have so many, and these are just, I could have shown you hundreds. As you see, there's about 1,400 of them across Queensland. Just to tell you where these are, from the top row from the left, we've got memorials in Atherton and Bow Desert, and the Women's Memorial frieze in ANZAC Square. That frieze on the right there was sculpted by Daphne Mayo, well-known sculptor, and in fact her brother, she incorporated her brother into the frieze, a likeness of her brother. That was unveiled in 1932. On the bottom row we've got memorials at Hellenden, Pyalba, Windsor and Maryborough. Maryborough, as you can see, big town, probably had more money, probably raised more money than most areas. They really went to town with their statues, as you can see. But my favourite, the one in the middle, Most diggers' statues, they had their tunics buttoned up. You often had a rifle. Not this guy. His tunic's unbuttoned. He's holding a pipe. And to me, I think if I'd had a son that went to war, I'd like to think of them like that, in a moment of reflection, perhaps, when they weren't on the front line, worrying about where the next shell was going to fall. I think, as I said, that's my favourite one. A bit more about remembrance in Queensland. There are all types of different memorials. Diggers, as I said, were very popular. The stonemasons in Brisbane could offer a basic digger statue for about £150. So for a lot of communities, they would be able to afford that. And every digger is slightly different when you look at those statues. But there were plinths and obelisks and broken columns, honour boards, we'll talk a bit about that today, memorial archways and captured trophies. So again, the ones we've got along the bottom here, statue in Dalby, a War Memorial Gate in Ayr, Mephisto, of course, the captured German tank at the Queensland Museum, and St Andrew's War Memorial Hospital, which was opened in 1958. So I find the variety of memorials and honour boards and other monuments fascinating. And after the Second World War, of course, there was more a move towards utilitarian, practical memorials. And so that's where we started to see, your swimming pools, your halls, your sporting ovals, that sort of stuff being built a lot more. Now, interestingly, unlike other states, in Queensland, there were no instructions issued to committees or communities for how to organise a memorial after the war ended. These days, Grace, I'm sure there'd be a government guideline. You'd be told, these are the designs you can choose from. Oh, and make sure that you mention where the money came from when you do the unveiling and its subsequent ceremonies. Well, none of that back then. Instead, such decisions were made locally by representatives from councils, churches, RSL sub-branches and other community groups. And across Queensland, local committees would have discussed designs and planned fundraising activities as they decided the most appropriate way to acknowledge those from their community who had served. I think there's something inherently democratic in that process. And the result of this localised process is best demonstrated in the different approaches taken to honour boards. Now, some communities began compiling and updating theirs as the war progressed, whereas others waited until after the conflict had ended. Thus, some memorials list names in the order in which the servicemen fell, while those compiled after the war ended usually list them in alphabetical order. But in both cases, additional names were often added after the board was finished, after someone came forward with new information. But how much information the boards contained was also left up to those who organised them, so consequently they vary markedly in how much they can tell us. Some just record the names of all who enlisted. Some record just the names of those who died. Some are more detailed, listing those who died or were wounded or received a military medal. Some include the serviceman's rank, whilst most of those are more egalitarian. But even the most detailed war memorial or monument or memorial board doesn't tell us the whole story. Some who died in war had no surviving family back home, or their family had moved while they'd been overseas, so there was no one left. There was no forwarding address. So there was no one left to pass on their details to those who were organising the memorial. And sadly, a colleague who's an expert in military research told me recently that some families actually chose not to have their son's name recorded on a memorial or honour board, simply because they could not bear the thought of seeing their name every time they went to church or the park or the bowls club. So there's an unknown number of those who died that are not recorded, except in the official army records and perhaps on one of those bronze panels which make up the roll of honour at the Australian War Memorial. And lastly, there's the question of the dates of the conflict. Many placed the end of the war at 1918, when the fighting stopped. Fair enough. But others went with a strict legal interpretation. The war only officially ended after the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in June 1919. So that's why you see some honour boards, memorials, 14 to 18, others say 14 to 19. And to me, and I'll show you some examples of these, you can get caught up in the statistics when you see a lot of names. But to me, the smaller the honour board or memorial, often the more poignant the stories behind it. Having said all that by way of preamble, let's take a look at some of the war memorials in our part of the world. So I identified about 20, and I grouped them into three main categories: monuments, plaques, and honour boards and rolls. And this is what Austin did for me. Isn't it great? I gave him the addresses and he's done some little icons, so thank you very much for that, Austin. I didn't realise we'd had so many memorials in our area until I really started looking, and they're found in many different forms. They commemorate many conflicts from World War I up until the present. Now, I had to leave some out simply because of time considerations. Brisbane Boys Grammar, for example. Any grammar boys here? Yes, all right, yes. You'll know that you've got a whole heap of war memorials at Brisbane Boys Grammar. So there's a library, yeah. So there's an artillery gun transport that was captured by an old boy, Brigadier General Wilson, in Palestine in 1918. There's stained glass windows, there's honour boards and honour books, there's a war memorial library and a memorial swimming pool. So they really went to town. So let's have a look at some of the main memorials around New Farm and surrounding area. So first of all, monuments. I've included buildings in this category. So a lot of you will be familiar with that tall column that's in Newstead Park. That's the Australian American Memorial. It's 10.7 metres high, held in sandstone. There's an eagle on the top. It was actually, I didn't realise this, but it was the first American war memorial built in Australia. So it was built before anybody else. And I think that's probably because we recognised how important the US was during World War II when they came here to help win the battle in the Pacific. There's a number of plaques. I won't go into all the details, you can see it all there. Submariners Walk, Heritage. There was a dawn service there this morning. Grace was there. Denise was there. Is that right? Anyone else there this morning? Yes, great. So that's the dawn service that was held this morning. I think that's done really well. I like the plaques. I like the way they've set it out. I like the submarine-shaped seats, which they put I think it's a blue glow at night. I think they've done a good job with that. That's been around since 2013. HMAS Morton, a much simpler thing, a very big anchor and a plaque. And that commemorates the HMAS Morton Naval Base. That building here is what the base looked like during World War II. That's from a plaque which Gerard, I think, put together down near there. I included that just to give you a sense of how many people were involved in HMAS Morton when it was in full swing. Sandakan Prisoners of War, again, there was a service there, I think it's at 9 o'clock, was there this morning. That's a very different memorial. It's got this bronze relief of the mountain range that the prisoners of war were forced to cross in 1945. So that memorial's been there since 1995. I think, yeah, well, yes, it was unveiled about the time of the 50th anniversary of Sandakan. It's the Sandakan Memorial Foundation that run that every year. Some examples of some of the servicemen that were there. As you see, there's 249 names on that memorial. And I'll just put in a plug. Virtual War Memorial is one of the better websites I've found for listing not just memorials, but they take information from the public. People can contribute details about individuals that are listed on war memorials and plaques, and they get added to that site. Coast Watchers Memorial, that's probably the most recent one. That was only opened last year. Some of you remember we've talked about that here at the Society. That honours the Coast Watchers who helped monitor the enemy movements in the Pacific during World War II. Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Shout out. Yeah. So an important plaque and gazebo. New Farm. They had their service yesterday. They always have it on ANZAC Day, but if ANZAC Day falls on a weekend, they have it the day closest. So I was very pleased to help represent the society there yesterday. I laid a plaque. It's a very touching memorial, this one. I don't know why I hadn't clicked until recently, but the fact is, and the reason there's only 25 names on it when it was such a big school, they've only included the 25 old boys who died. So all these names here, they're all fellows who didn't come back. Okay. So, well, there's some details about it there. Originally, it was a drinking fountain, which is interesting. But what was interesting, well, it's always interesting, but what particularly interesting yesterday was that the groundsman, Tony, who Grace knows very well, Grace and Michael know, who I think has been at the school about 8 years, wrote some words which I think he was too shy to present. Someone else presented. But you'll notice the first two names here on the memorial, Robert and David Baldy. They spoke about those two brothers and about how Robert Baldy had been the first one to enlist. He'd been a warehouseman after he'd left New Farm State School. He worked for one of Brisbane's biggest department stores, Foy and Gibson, which were a Melbourne-based firm that were here for a little while in the valley, a bit like Meyer or David Jones. When he signed up as soon as the war started in August 1914. He was 19. So being under 21, his parents would have had to give him their written permission. He left a few weeks later from Pinkenbar. He was promoted to corporal. He was one of the first ANZACs ashore on the 25th of April 1915, and then he was killed in action a few days later on the 8th of May at the Battle of Garber Teep. Now, David was his older brother. Interestingly, he wasn't a warehouseman. He was very good as a horseman. And when he joined up, he was 22, and he joined the Australian Light Horse Brigade in Sydney. Now, of course, if you've seen the movie Gallipoli, you'll know that the light horse weren't allowed to take their horses with them. Wouldn't have done them much good anyway, so they didn't take him to Gallipoli. He was also promoted to corporal. He was sent to Gallipoli. He landed there soon after that first Anzac Day. A few years later, on the 6th of June, he was wounded in battle, taken to a hospital ship, and died. He was buried at sea. So he has, I think they say, known only to God. So he does not have a grave. And as it was said yesterday, 25 names, as they told the kids, that's about the size of one of our classes. And I wonder what message Robert and David would have for you today. I'm sure they would encourage you to do your best, as they did, to make the world a safer and wiser place where children can grow, study, and achieve their dreams. Oh, that's the names of the 25. And there's some of the details there. Again, virtual war memorial, very good site. Okay, and we've talked about the two Baldy brothers. Plaques, another section. So these are some of the plaques around the place. You'd all be familiar probably with the former Limbless Soldiers Hall in Oxlade Drive. That site was actually acquired in 1943 when the Americans were here as an officers' mess, and it's nice that they've actually renamed that area the officers' mess now. After the war, it was leased by the Limbless Soldiers and Sailors and Soldiers. It's now used by the RSL as their Southeast District headquarters. And there's a number of plaques and flagpoles in that courtyard named after all sorts of, not just battles, but actually associations as well. So it's worth wandering down there and having a look and reading those plaques. Our Lady of Victories, Catholic Church, most of you would be familiar with that. That's the one with the blue cross. I think they still light it at night up on Bowen Hills. That was built as a memorial to Catholic soldiers and sailors who fought and died in World War I. It's also known as the White Temple of Peace, Spanish mission style. It was actually handed over to the Catholic Polish community by the Catholic Church in 1955. So it has a real focus on Poland and what poor old Poland, their soldiers and their prisoners of war went through, first at the hands of the Germans and then the Russians and then the Germans again during World War II.
They marched in Brisbane.
Oh, did they?
At noon, yeah.
Good. Okay. St Michael and All Angels. I didn't even know about this plaque until I was told by someone from the RSL. It's actually around the side of the church. It's a bronze plaque, or brass perhaps. It's not in good nick. And the RSL rep and I agree that we should ask the church to take it inside. Because it's been outside in the weather. Although it's strictly under an eave, it actually has obviously copped a lot of weather. You can see how pitted those names are from those close-ups. But, you know, it's an important memorial, and I think it needs a little bit of TLC. But again, like the Catholic Church, it was built specifically as a war memorial church. So that's why I class it. It's a monument, but it's also got plaques. So some of these you could fit in 2 or 3 of the categories. And here's someone, and I mentioned outside someone, I don't know if you found out about this yesterday. There's a nurse that's recognised out the back, because I think her ashes may be in the columbarium. But a nurse who went off to war, she's recognised again on that war memorial site. I'd love to know more about her. I've only just found out about her though, okay? But it's nice to see nurses recognised, not just the blokes. Lavinia Hardcastle. Born in Calbar, it was called Engelsburg back then. A lot of names with German names got changed in all over Australia. I remember in South Australia, German sausage became Fritz. It became Belgian sausage. That's right. It was known as Fritz. They changed it to Belgian. German shepherds became Alsatians. All sorts of stuff happened. It's fascinating. Okay, honour boards and roll. These are my favourite types of memorials. I'll talk about some of these as we go through. New Farm Bowls Club, probably my favourite one in terms of the honour board. It's high on the wall. I mean, it's great they've kept it. No one chucked it in a skip or anything, but it's fairly high. I had to stand on a table to get a good photo of the board. I promised not to sue if I fell off. What's fascinating though is that this is one of those clubs that started their honour board while the war was still going. So that was probably in about 1917, as you can see. It just says 1914 dash, and there were another few names to add on that last column before the war finally ended. So that's interesting. There's a close-up of the hand-painted crest and crowns. I think it's beautiful. I really do. Again, there's the names. You know what I found out just yesterday? The Baldy brothers, the ones that were on the New Farm Memorial, were obviously keen bowlers as well because they're also on the New Farm Bowls Club. I've shared that information with the school. It's just one of those little pieces in the jigsaw that you pick up. And there's an example of one of the fellows who went off, Frank Scougall. What's interesting is where they don't, so if it's red, they've got details on that particular soldier, serviceman. Where it's black, they ask for information. So they're building this database all the time. There's lots of different databases. Some are official, some are semi-official, some are just done by family members that were interested in it. But I've found no one site that has all of our memorials in this area. Broodabin, that's a lovely honour board. You'll start to see things like, and this was a gentleman's bowls club apparently, which might explain why they have the ranks on them. But that's a lovely honour board. And what's just as nice is that they have some display panels on either side talking about some of those blokes who enlisted. So there you get the context. And what's nice, this isn't in some back room, it's in the bar. So, you know, people see it. So I'd really recommend going down there and having a sherbet and reading the information about some of those blokes that are on their honour board. I think that's a good template about how things should be done with honour boards. Because it's one thing to have an honour board. To have the context is even better. Okay. CSR. Now I thank Connie Hamer for alerting me to this and her husband for taking the photos. This was the honour board for the CSR, Colonial Sugar Refinery Company. It was kept and it's in the gym of, is it called Cutters? Yeah, of Cutters. So when Gary works out at the gym, he can ponder the names on the honour board.
Are they the people that died when they were exercising?
No, they didn't have gyms back. Well, only footballers probably exercised in gyms back then. So what's interesting, you've got World War I and II, and they started putting returned for the First World War, because there's only a few names, but they didn't do that for the second. But you can see for the asterisks who died and who returned. Okay. Interestingly, 2 women, Jill Law, Jessie Stewart. I haven't researched them yet. I'm assuming they probably were nurses. Don't know. They might have joined up as part of admin staff, for example, in one of the army units, or headquarters somewhere. Headquarters here, maybe not overseas. I don't know. I'm guessing, as you can tell. I'd like to find out who they are. Holy Trinity Anglican Church in the Valley has got a lovely series of honour boards and a stained glass window as well. Well worth a look at. Brunswick Street Methodist. This honour board is about 50 metres from here in this building, in the church. It used to be, as it says, Brunswick Street Methodist honour board. Now, interestingly, with this one, you've got who was wounded, who was killed, who died of wounds, 2 that were invalided home, but this is the bit I love, 2 that were rejected for military service. And that's important. I mean, we can laugh. I know, it is fun. But when you consider that Australia was totally a volunteer force in World War I, what did that mean? It meant that if you looked fit and you were on a tram or a train and someone might have said to you, why haven't you joined up yet? Well, you might have tried to join up, but you had terrible feet or bad teeth or something, especially early in the war where the restrictions were much higher. Yes, Dave? Exactly. So what happened was blokes that had tried to sign up formed their own association, and they had badges that would say things like rejected. So people that see them would go, oh, right, okay, well, he's obviously got something. He tried. And this is the only board I've seen, and I think there are others though, where they've actually acknowledged 2 of their congregation who wanted to enlist but for whatever reason got turned down. So they get a mention on the board as well. I think that's fascinating. Now, this is the sort of campaign I'm running at the moment. Grace knows about this. This massive honour board with 166 names, it's been mentioned at society meetings, and I think Gerard put it in a newsletter a few years ago, used to be in what was originally the Fortitude Valley Boys' School. They used to have a Fortitude Valley Boys' School and a girls' school until 1949. This is the names of all of the old boys and teachers who joined up from the boys' school, right? And it was in the school, on display in the new combined school from 1950 until 2013, when the school was closed. Now, to their credit, the RSL sub-branch, the one I talked about down at Oxlade Drive, took it in as custodians. This honour board is in a corridor on Oxlade Drive, where I think probably 4 people see it every day. I couldn't even get a photo of the whole board because it's only about this, the corridor's about this wide. So that's why I had to take it in segments. It's a work in progress, but I've been talking with the RSL and I've emailed the new principal at the secondary college, because I think that's where it belongs. Particularly now, they're not only local kids, that could be researched by the kids there, but you've got an older demographic than, say, the state school, the primary school. You've got high school kids that are studying Australia in war that could easily do a project on some of these names. The other thing I think it's important to do is, this is one of those honour boards which just has the names. We have no idea how many were killed, how many were wounded, how many got the military medal. It's almost a blank canvas in that sense. There are just 166 names. I'd love to see the school find somewhere appropriate to display it. I'd love to incorporate it in maybe an ANZAC Day or Memorial Day service. I'd love to see kids use, in fact, the archives, National Archives, are more than happy to come out and show the kids how to use accessing that data, which you can these days, online. Look, to me it's a no-brainer. There may be some logistical reasons why it may not happen. Watch this space. Those are all the people that helped me put all this together, but I just wanted to say a couple of things about ANZAC Day and memorials before we finish. Back in 1985, historian Judith Mackay, a colleague of mine, was commissioned by RSL Queensland to inspect, catalogue and report on war memorials across Queensland. She found many of them had been damaged or deteriorated or lost or stolen. Thankfully, in the 40 or so years since then, I think we're being better at education. There's been money put towards restoring such monuments, and I think we're in a better place when it comes to recognising the importance of these memorials. But there's still more work that can be done to preserve our local memorials and find out more about those who are listed on them. Some of their custodians, as I mentioned, Barudman Bowls Club, have done a great job to not only display their boards but also tell the story of some of those on them. Other boards are tucked away from the general public or they're in need of repair. Today marks 111 years since that first ANZAC Day. Will future generations care? Well, I think it all depends on how we examine and tell the narrative. People often say to me there's not enough emphasis on Australian history in the modern curriculum. Well, they're wrong. What has changed is the greater emphasis now on uncovering the previously untold stories of women, of our First Nations people, of those from multicultural backgrounds and those from other marginalised groups and their roles during wartime. The internet is making it easy to access and share information. And I've mentioned already, there's several memorial sites, some official, some are voluntary. But no one site has all the information. This week I learned that one of those listed on the New Farm Bowls Club on a board, Private Alan Frankel, was Jewish. Yesterday, as I mentioned, I discovered the Baldy brothers on the New Farm State School Memorial are also listed on the New Farm Bowls Club honour board. But there are other questions still to be answered. Who were Miss Jill Law and Jessie Stewart, the two women I mentioned listed on the CSR honour board? When I was researching my biography on the footballer Roy Kazali, I was struck by how much of the debate over conscription during World War I was led and shaped by politicians, preachers and the press. These days we live in a much more open, pluralistic, questioning society, and I believe this is a good thing. Unfortunately, it's become fashionable to measure the past action of others using the standards of today. I think we owe it to those who came before us to try and put ourselves in their shoes, to try to understand the world as it was in 1914, or 1939, or 1968, and the motivations and pressures on those who enlisted and those who sent them off to fight. To not label past wars as just or unjust through the prism of what we know today. Yes, to recognise mateship and sacrifice, whilst also acknowledging that Australia does not actually hold a worldwide monopoly on these virtues. And to acknowledge how wars have shaped our nation, but without resorting to chauvinism toward former or current foes. There's a fine line sometimes between national pride and jingoism. And at the local level, I think we should continue to look after and protect these memorials. We should find out more of the stories behind the names. We should invite others to find out more about their own stories. To encourage respect, compassion, and understanding. And I saw all of those qualities on display at New Farm State School yesterday, and it gave me some hope for the future, lest we forget.